all aspects across the continent, right? AIRA Talks, which is the conversation you're here for, is our platform. It's an opportunity for policymakers, civil society leaders, and representatives of various organizations who are interested in advancing digital rights on the continent to convene regularly and to share experiences and learnings with the aim of enhancing collaboration and impact in the digital rights space. All right, so today, as you already know, we have the conversation on climate change or climate justice and digital rights. The title is Digital Rights in the Drive for a Sustainable Society. And we're going to be navigating the intersection between climate justice and digital rights. We have experts here in the building, but I'm not going to be your moderator. I'm going to hand over to the moderator. Our moderator is Nancy. Nancy is here. Nancy will take over from me, and you're going to have a really good time. Once again, welcome everyone. If you know someone that should be here and is not here, please send them a reminder, nudge them to be here, because we're about to have a really enlightening time. Nancy, you can take over. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever you're joining us from. Like Adebor said, welcome to AIRA Talks. And yes, it's the October edition. And fortunately, or, it's kind of like a special edition because it's like the last for the year 2023. It's a pleasure. I'll be moderating this beautiful discussion this afternoon. All right, without much ado, I just want to bring you up to speed. You already know we're recording the session. So after the session, you're free to, go back. We would share the link to the video, and you can go back and, reflect and, ask more questions where you need clarity on. All right, yes, 10th edition of AIRA Talks, last one for the year. Now let's keep it going. If you would be introducing our speakers shortly, but would have a time at the end of the session for questions. But in the meantime, as the session progresses and you have questions and you don't want to forget towards the end, feel free to drop it on the chat box, yes, and we'll see them. And then we can ask and pick all of them. And I want us to do a very short exercise before we kickstart, just to tell everybody what we're doing currently. So if you're watching with your laptop, I want you to take a screenshot of it, of the screen. We have all, just let us turn on our video cameras briefly and just let's show our beautiful face. Just the way mine is here like this now. Please do well to turn on your video cameras. If you can, if you can't, thank you so much. Thank you, Kemunto. Did I get that right? Thank you. Yes. So please, Yvonne, Brian, Adeboro. Oh, okay. Admin, yes, briefly. Yes. Now that we have it coming on, I want you to take a screenshot of it. Just take a screenshot and then tweet about it. So I don't know if Adeboro can grant access to the participants, so they just turn on their video briefly. You take a screenshot and you tweet about it. You post it on IG, on LinkedIn, and tell everybody that you're currently attending the October editions of AIRA Talk, and put the topic and let everybody know that what we're discussing here is something really important. Climate justice, climate change, digital rights. They are interwoven, and we're about to go further. Oh, okay. I think it's your network. If you can hear me, use your emoji to say 100, or I can hear you, just confirm with a thumbs up. If you can hear me. Yes, thank you, Lauritta. So yes, please tweet about it. Post on social media, post on Twitter, post on Facebook, post on Instagram, and then you can feel free to turn off your camera while we proceed. All right, so while we're doing that, you can also follow us on Twitter. It's at AIRA Africa, but it is AIRA Africa. Yes, AIRA FRICA. And we're also on LinkedIn with our full name, African Internet Rights Alliance. And our website is aira.africa. Yes, so you can check us out also on our YouTube channel at AIRA's Digital Rights. All right, so let me just bring you up to speed on the panelists that we have today. We're discussing digital rights and climate justice, which is very, very important at this time. This is a time where climate change is really, really becoming very significant global crisis, impacting not only the environment, but, we're talking about our health as humans, our means of survival, our livelihood, and even the social system. Right, and there is a need to also protect the digital rights, particularly at a time when internet and social media platforms have become, powerful too. We use them not just, for the selfies and, keeping up with trends, but also to raise awareness and, mobilize communities and advocate for change as well, including issues related to climate justice. We have a lineup of our panelists with significant experiences, and they'll be discussing with us, as we proceed. Just to do a brief introduction, I will be calling on them. They have about one minute each. They'll turn on their video and then they'll introduce themselves. So let me start with Tricia Nabaye. Tricia is the Engagement and Advocacy Coordinator at Pollicy. So Tricia, kindly turn on your video camera and introduce yourself. Thank you. Tricia, we can't hear you, you're muted.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone, all 22 of you here. My name is Tricia Gloria Nabaye, and I am the Engagement and Advocacy Lead at Pollicy. And my niche is really around research, feminist research on cyber policy and digital rights. And I'm really happy to be part of this. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tricia. We look forward to having an insightful conversation with you. Next on our panel list is Barrack Otieno. He's a trustee with KICTANet. Hello, Barrack. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. My name is Barrack Otieno, a trustee at the Kenya ICT Action Network. I'm happy to be here and to engage. And I always follow AIRA very closely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for following us closely. We have Lauritta Boniface. Lauritta is the co-founder of Ecocykle. Hello, Lauritta.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from Nigeria. It's good to be here today. And very interestingly, we're having a timely conversation today. And I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And last but not the least is Emmaqulate Kemunto. She's the founder, Climate Change Lawyers Café.
Thank you, Nancy. Hi, everybody. My name is Emmaqulate Kemunto. I'm an environmental and climate justice lawyer and advocate and campaigner, and really looking forward to today's conversation.
All right, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Right, as we proceed, let me just give us a recap. Like, we're here to explore the intersection between two pivotal movements in history. We're talking about the digital rights movement and then the climate justice movement. Now, why is this very important? Both of them are important because the fight for the respect for digital rights is increasingly becoming more crucial. It's more important, as technology advances, and then you want to advocate for equitable enjoyment of both the digital development of technology as well, while advocating for privacy, responsible and ethical data governance practices and policies. We're talking about the freedom of speech, expression in a world where more conversations are happening online than physical. Let's speak about where we are right now, AIRA talks the 10th edition and all of that. So we're just going to be looking at the roadmap between climate justice and digital rights, the intersection between the two worlds, the fusion between the two worlds, and we'll be asking our speakers, our panelists, share more thoughts based on their experience on things we need to know on the two global problems that demand not just an individual response, but a collective response. And this will also help us to explore touch points, an area of confluence, so that we can reinforce ourselves as an organization, as an individual, and by so doing, for the greater good, of course, create room, enabling environment for issues like this to advance, of course, climate change, climate justice, talk about the transition and all of those. There's a host of that. So let me start with Emmaqulate, right? Now, Emmaqulate, we're in a room filled with mostly digital rights advocates. So I would want you to start off the conversation with a brief overview of what climate justice movement seeks to achieve, like generally, talking about like from a broader perspective right now. Emmaqulate.
Thank you, Nancy. I think I can start with defining what is the climate justice movement, which is really a global collection of individuals and organizations, mostly from the grassroots, because these are the people who've borne the brunt of climate impacts, who are at the forefront of demanding climate justice. And when we say climate justice, we're really referring to upholding human rights in sustainable development and climate action. When we are talking about climate justice, we are talking about addressing historical inequalities, marginalization, colonization, and systemic oppressions in addressing the climate crisis. We cannot talk about climate justice without talking about decolonization, without talking about racism, without talking about feminism, emancipation, and without talking about equality and access, because the climate crisis is not just a scientific problem, it's a social problem, it's a human rights problem, it's a marginalization problem, it's an oppression problem, it's a decolonization problem. And so what does the movement seek to achieve? Simply put, we are rallying for a livable planet for us and for the future generations. We are fighting for our right to live, literally, and we are also fighting to ensure that the people who've contributed least to climate change and who are now suffering the most being the nations and the people of the global south are represented in climate change decision-making processes, in climate change negotiations. So really to ensure that young people, children, women, from the global south, the youth from the global south are represented in these global, national, international decision-making processes. And this can only be possible if there is free and access to information, and that is accurate and truthful information, which I guess is where the issues of disinformation and digital rights and rights of access come into play. The climate justice movement seeks to ensure that the voices of these people are centered in climate change conversations and negotiations. And in addition to this, the movement is advocating for a just transition, which essentially is moving, the world to a low carbon economy, but while doing that, making sure that no one is left behind. So addressing all those contexts or problems that I have mentioned or have alluded to earlier, the problems of, the impacts of colonization, the impacts of continuous marginalization of indigenous people, of women, of youth, of young people, and ensuring that all these are are addressed so that as we move to a low carbon economy, no one is really left behind. And the movement is advocating for access to affordable, sustainable, and clean energy, especially for the 600 million plus Africans and other people from the global south who currently do not have access to electricity. We are agitating and asking for reforms in the finance sector, in global finance, and this is restructure colonial finance systems. It's, currently developing countries, poor nations have to take out loans for development as it is and as it's been happening for the longest time. but then have to pay up these loans with an interest of about 4 times more than wealthy nations. And these are demands that are competing with other needs that these countries have: poverty, diseases, climate change impacts. So also addressing the financial structure is one of the key really goals or things that the climate justice movement is looking to have that restructured, being more radical with talking about debt cancellations and all that. And maybe to finalize this is reparations for loss and damage. And we've seen this as a conversation that has really built up since COP26 in Glasgow. And these have been conversations led by Africans, led by African activists, led by African advocates. And with these agitations, last year, there was, the bittersweet win of the loss and damage conversations. Although the loss and damage facility was not established, at least there was an initial step to move toward having loss and damage, dialogues on how that facility will be set up. So just in a nutshell, really, that's what the climate justice movement seeks to achieve, and especially from an African perspective. Back to you, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Emmaqulate. Rallying for a livable planet, and not just for us, for the future generation. I was able to connect with that. And in the journey for just transition, ensuring that no one is left behind in our move to a low carbon economy. Thank you so much for that. I'll come back to you, but I would love to have Tricia speak to us of how both movements work together. Okay, so for instance, as digital rights advocates here, we often push for better data governance policies and practices. Now, knowing that environmental data is a powerful tool in climate advocacy, how can both movements work together to ensure that responsible data governance principles are integrated into climate data collection?
Hello, Nancy.
Yes, Tricia, you can unmute now.
All right, thank you very much.
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, so when we speak about data governance and data protection, a lot of the narratives and then the important principles into climate data collection and sharing practices is equally essential. And so one of the things that we can do together with the climate community is in encouraging collaboration between digital rights activists and advocates and climate advocates, because the common goal is that we want to have both responsible and ethical use of data. So in collecting it, we need to work together to develop frameworks and ensure that the data collected for climate advocacy really adheres with the principles of data ethics, consent, and privacy. And that also includes to where we take our campaigns as climate activists, to where we take our, agency and advocacy within the communities. Are we speaking to the people that we are advocating for? Are we taking their data with consent? And so the whole narrative around data ethics, consent, and privacy still do work. And also part of this collaboration then can result in creation of guidelines and standards for climate data collection, especially emphasizing transparency, equally also expediting on our need to, remove the secrecy and the blurriness of understanding what climate justice is really about. So we need to also, extend this conversation into relatable conversations, into storytelling. That way, whatever data we are collecting really speaks for the people that we are advocating for when it comes to climate justice. We also need to think about issues of protecting the individual's privacy and digital rights. A lot of the narratives that are told, do we, value the faces of the people we're advocating for? For example, if we're speaking for Uganda, for the people in the oil communities in Hoima, how are we telling their stories? Are we respecting their privacy and digital rights? And the other entry point that we can merge data governance issues and collaborate with, climate advocates in data collection is on data security and transparency. we need to, in our advocacy, especially for climate, we need to think about how sensitive environmental data is, and so that we do not, misuse it or expose it to serious consequences. And so climate advocates need to really think about how they can work with digital rights advocates to contribute to, ensuring robust data security measures. We also need to think about how to encourage climate advocates to openly share information about the data that they've collected, about the sources they have, and about the purpose that they're going to use this. That way you build trust and accountability in the climate of data practice, in the climate data practice, and we help the data advocates and the climate advocates find a link where they can use trust and accountability in their advocacy. A lot of times the imagination is that environmental data is only statistics, is only the consequences the environment has faced, but also environmental data has human faces to it. And so we need to think about how we protect those humans, how we advocate for them without, exposing them to harm. Also, that also goes to the journalists that handle this data when we have it, how they report on it, how they engage the public on it, and how they educate the public. And so for us, the entry point for a lot of us digital advocates, but also climate advocates, is to also include public engagement and education for the people that we are advocating for, to raise awareness about the ethical implications of climate data collection and sharing, but also to help them understand what these advocacy campaigns are really about when it comes to climate. So in both movements working together, we can then push to advocate for policies that protect individual rights while advocating for their environmental rights and environmental agencies, but also build public trust and support in the critical issues. For example, policy change, where we're influencing for policy change, but also where we are advocating for environment preservation. So for us as digital advocates, we are hoping that responsible data governance is at the heart and is in the context of climate advocacy, so that there are individuals, there are people, there are policies, there are instruments that need to be protected in our public engagement, in our advocacy, but also in our push for, change, and in our push for new nuances in dealing with issues around climate. I think that is what I would say for now. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Tricia. Thank you for sharing that. She was speaking about data governance principles and how they can be integrated into climate data collection and sharing practices, right? And one thing I took out from there is that behind the numbers, because when they say climate data, statistics, but behind those statistics are individuals. And of course, while protecting the data and, working with data ethics, governing data collection as well, we should also protect the individuals behind this data. And this speaks in the method at which these data are reported, and there's a need to also build trust and support. And I like the way you said openly sharing information about where the people that are mining the data, where they get it from, to establish a level of transparency, accountability, trust with both themselves and the society, right? Thank you so much for that. Now, we just want to, let's drive into the conversation deeper, and we're looking at the realities now. Take, for instance, in Africa, right? What are some of the realities? And I'm coming to Lauritta on this one. In Africa, what are the realities and consequences of online climate disinformation? We know that, there's a just transition going on, not just in Africa, in other parts of the world as well, other continents, right? And as much as we're driving for climate change, climate justice, with the same fire, there is so much disinformation that is out there, right? So what are the realities and what are the consequences of this online climate disinformations that, that are making wave on socials and on the media? Lauritta.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. I hope you can hear me. I'm really in a very noisy place. I'm having an active day. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I believe everyone can hear you.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. So I'll start by saying that when you talk about climate action or you talk about climate change and its impact, there's no community that is really exempted or immune from this impact. And that gets the level of the UNFCCC, which is like the overall umbrella body. And climate change, it's about diplomacy, negotiations. And those negotiations feed into informations, data, scenarios that are played out even with the IPCC. So climate change, I would also talk about, I'm trying to see the issue of misinformation. In recent time, the young people have really built, say, a community using digital tools like the social media, sending out information regarding climate change impact, solutions, innovative solutions that are out there, especially in Africa. I myself have utilized or leveraged on this digital tool in my early days as an advocate before I got into negotiations, to really push out information, to really educate the public on what we call climate change and the impact we see around us. And when sharing some of those information, one thing we should be careful about is how we picture. We're talking about, we're giving this information out to people. We want them to understand what we're saying. And we're talking about climate action and climate change. And when you come to Africa, especially in Nigeria, I understand that people are faced with climate change and the impact of it, but then there are people that don't even understand that this is climate change that is happening. Unless you break it down to them, okay, this is how it affects you, and they resonate it with what is affecting them, which is how we should all portray some of this information. We could not just go to a region where they are not faced with a particular impact, because yes, the climate change impact ranging from flooding to drought. I'm talking about the context in Nigeria. We have flooding, which happened last year. There was livelihood were lost, deaths were occurred in the flooding last year. Even this year, there was so much flooding that was predicted, though we're still looking and hoping that it doesn't happen. But then reality is we're facing the impact of climate change. So when you're communicating to people, because these are people that are impacted, communicate to them in a language they will understand. Misinformation is very bad, because I visited a community last year, and I was like, I saw a student, and I was, she said she knew about climate change, and she was telling me, she said her first encounter with climate change was a picture of a zombie, and someone was telling her that is how she will look like in the coming years if she doesn't take action. And I was like, it's really bad for someone to paint this image to a young child that is growing up. Paint an image with the impact that is occurring around them. When you go to a farming community, there is the impact of climate change on drought, desertification. Paint an image with what is occurring around them. I feel that is the best way to disseminate this information. And as young people, as we progress, it's 1 month to the conference of the 28th Conference of Parties. This is where you find a lot of things happening, a lot of activities, a lot of actions, negotiation, climate diplomacy, and even policy. We should be careful in sharing information, because you have a lot of things going on there. When sharing information, confirm the source of information, because you're feeding it to people that are back home. People, there are a community of people that are looking up to you to get information about what is happening at the global level. When feeding them with this information, verify the source, verify the data you're sharing to people, because that is really, really important. Climate change is about position and interest. Be careful, because when sharing information, you might end up sharing another context of, or another position that is not African's position, or another interest that is not African interest. So when you're sharing this information, or as a young person, when you're in some of this convention, try as much as you can to push African agenda. And when disseminating the information, try as much as you can in your information to also promote and push African interests and position. Thank you so much. Sorry, I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Lauritta. We appreciate the fact that you were able to take out the time. You know, your day is busy and it's still busy, but we appreciate that. Yes, there is no two ways about saying we need to verify data, not just even speaking about climate now, but any data that we're pushing out there, as long as we're pushing it out on social media, on the platform, and in the internet, we need to be careful, verify the data, and be sure that we're pushing out facts, because people tend to tie facts to data. They'll be like, where's your facts? Show me the numbers, show me the data, right? And if we're owning that, we should own the truth. We should own actual data. And she made mention of the fact that climate change is all about diplomacy and negotiation, and more about how you communicate it. And so you don't really scare people off to think, oh, climate change is, related to the zombies that she cited as an example. We appreciate your thoughts on that. Thank you so much, Lauritta. But we'll still be maintaining climate disinformation conversation right now. And let me move over to Barrack, our fourth panelist, right? What strategies and tools can be employed to combat online climate disinformation? Because getting the disinformation is one thing, but how can people move past this disinformation to actually get the right data? How can they look beyond the negative information that is being peddled on social media, on the internet, on the digital platforms to actually get the actual data? So the tools and strategies that we can employ, that citizens can employ or individuals can employ to actually combat disinformations regarding climate issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nancy. I hope I'm loud and clear.
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you for that excellent moderation. And also, this is a very interesting conversation. I must admit that it's my first time on a panel that is discussing climate change, and out of ignorance or abundance of ignorance, I have not paid attention to these critical issues, despite the fact that I deal with them on a day-to-day basis. And maybe I speak to, I may be an example of many other actors in the policy space who are not considering this conversation. And so I think I'm saying that because when we started this conversation, I was very curious, why is AIRA bringing
Barrack, I can't hear you. I think your network is having issues. If you can hear, no, we can't hear you. I believe, Tricia, can you hear him? No, we can't hear you. I think your network is having issue. Yes. So, yes, unmute yourself again.
Apologies. I was just checking whether I'm audible.
You were audible, but it's glitchy.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I can.
All right. Okay. Let me proceed. So from a more practical standpoint, I think I'll start with access to the internet. I'll say this because I work at mostly on infrastructure access and policy issues. And I've had an opportunity to work in communities on projects that touch on food security and environmental management. And again, reflecting on my childhood, I used to see in the 80s, don't judge how old I am, but our president used to build gabions in the community. And it really looked cool at that particular time. As a child, we were not really told the purpose of those gabions. I hope I'm on the same page with all the speakers. But at that time, we were facing serious erosion within our communities. And the president was at the forefront of forestalling erosion and championing agriculture practices that would ensure that we would limit soil erosion from our farms. Of course, no one said that soil erosion was as a result of trees being cut. Fast forward, another narrative started that we are in the current climate predicament or situation because we have cut trees. But no one really says what is the correlation between cutting trees and climate. Of course, in primary school, you get the picture that there is osmosis, and at every given time during the day, trees release some water in the sky, which then condenses and then produces rain. But such a crucial subject, yet we are glossing over the surface on matters critical to the issue of climate change. So to answer the question that has been posed to me, I think access to information is one of the most critical factors in addressing this issue of climate change. Coupled to access to information, I'll talk about access to the internet, because we are in an era where, one, if you don't have access to the internet, you are already marginalized. Once the issue of access to the internet is addressed, then there is the issue of the information that is being shared on the internet. We have to ensure that the right information is being shared with respect to matters climate change. And I'm glad that there are numerous organizations that are really focused on this conversation. But I want to bring another side of infrastructure, which contributes a lot to climate change, which a few organizations have been talking about, but I believe it is time for us to ramp up the conversation. This has to do with the infrastructure that we use. As an infrastructure engineer and working in communities where I also work at the intersection of food security and environmental management, sometimes we use a concept that is referred to as line of sight when we are deploying telecommunications infrastructure. And our biggest enemy are normally trees, which block line of sight. So you find the shortest route to addressing the line of sight issues is to cut down trees or to chop off branches. Inevitably, as we strive to provide internet access, we are also introducing another problem that will result in effect on the climate. Again, in our quest to increase the number of users on the internet, we are encouraging people to get devices, whether smart or otherwise. And you find that we are also increasing the number of e-waste. Yet in many of our countries, we don't have clear structures or clear frameworks for handling e-waste. I've seen that e-waste is a big industry. Many of the countries in the global north are now importing transistors, importing motherboards that are in digital devices and reusing them on equipment which is then sold to us. This in a way is extractivism. But I just wanted to know that e-waste is a critical issue. The other thing is we have data centers that are using a lot of energy. And right now there's a quest to have green data centers. Instead of using grid, and when I say grid, for instance, when I look at Kenya, where I am, 75% of our power is basically extracted from the environment. We import power from Uganda, from Jinja, I think the Owen Falls Dam, and we import power from Ethiopia. And you find that when there's a drop in the level of rivers, then there's a very huge effect, because some of these data centers that most of us are relying on consume massive amounts of energy or power. So how can we encourage green data centers? The other thing is, as we push for more people to come online, are we using devices that conserve power? For example, are our websites, as I was preparing for this session, I realized that there are institutions which have even developed website checkers that help you to check whether your website is climate friendly. For example, when you talk of a website being climate friendly, the question is it hosted in a data center that is environment friendly, using green energy? Second question would be in its use of images or design. Does it consume a lot of power on the devices that it is in? Because the more power that it is consumed, the more this power has to be extracted from somewhere. And I think we need to start with consumers, provide the right content for them to play their effective role in ensuring that they are contributing to the climate change narrative. And when it comes to service providers, encourage them to take up services from green data centers, encourage them to deploy technologies that are climate friendly, those that do not really extract unnecessary power from the environment. But more importantly, I think what is key for us is to pass information on what it takes to have a climate friendly environment, because this information is not really there. And if it is there, it is probably geared towards other environments other than the African environment that we are in. I'm saying the African environment because not every member of the African community speaks English or uses English as their first language. So we may also need to consider those little issues that contribute to marginalization. Let me stop at that and pass the mic back to Nancy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barrack. One thing that is sinking across board is access to information, access to the right information, right? But Barrack, I'll still be on you just for a bit. Now, having said that, how can both movements now work together to tackle this problem? You've identified a number of problems, for service providers using deploying technologies that are climate friendly. Do you understand? Having the access to the right information, sharing the right information, access to data. Data centers are also using a lot of energy, but now we should use energies that are climate friendly. So how can both movements now work together to tackle this problem? Talk about the climate justice movement and then the digital rights movement.
Thank you very much. Speaking as a person who is majorly working within the technology ecosystem, sometimes I don't have much time to actually focus on critical issues on the climate justice movement. And I think there is room for synergies where the climate justice movement can actually feed into the work that technologies and basically people working on digital rights are doing. This could be by way of policy briefs. This could be by way of evidence-based research on how some of our technological interventions are actually interfering with the environment. This could also be in the way of talks such as this. I must admit that this is a great eye-opener to me, also in ensuring that we deploy responsible infrastructure and we have policies in place that ensure that we deploy responsible infrastructure. We deploy the right infrastructure that aligns to global and local climate change goals. So I think those are the issues that I would really cite at this point as the areas of collaboration that I see, which are low-hanging fruits. So we need more of these kind of conversations that not only bring awareness, but should also evolve into sessions that actually generate policy briefs with clear action points that those in digital rights or those deploying technology should actually be able to pursue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. You mentioned synergy, deploying responsible infrastructure, and as well as policy that are in favor of these. Lauritta, let's hear from you how both movements can work together to tackle this problem. Lauritta, you have the floor. I would just want to hear your 2 cents on how both movements can tackle this problem.
So sorry. I'm in a very busy place. What was the question again?
Yes, so earlier Barrack was speaking to disinformation and strategies to combat online climate disinformation, right? And he also shared how how both movements, that's the climate justice movement and then the digital rights movements, can work together to tackle issues like this. So we're asking, how can you bring both movements together to work and tackle this problem? That is the problem of climate disinformation, online climate disinformation.
Okay, I think I'll start by saying that climate advocates and activists should be aware of some of this harm or the harm of this information or misinformation, I would say. If we start by that and educate them, then they would understand from the point that, okay, this information or whatever I share, or what if I have the access to information, there are things I should verify before sharing the information. And I like the point where he mentioned synergy. This is very, very
we can't hear you. I think your sound, we can't hear you anymore. You were sharing how both movements can come together to tackle the problem. I think we've lost you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. You were
Yes.
speaking on synergy.
Yes. I said synergy can be another way forward to see that looking forward approach to see that this movement come together to promote safe information for the general public. Sorry, I'll have to stop here. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that. Advocates and activists awareness and synergy to promote safe information. Yes, thank you. So just before I call on the next speaker, if you have questions, you can drop them on the chat, just to put it out there so we don't forget. We'll be taking all questions at the end of the conversation. Just drop it so we pick it at the end. Right. So Emmaqulate, now that we've had the climate online disinformation out of the way, how to tackle it out of the way, why don't you speak to unique challenges and opportunities for climate justice on the continent? Now, speaking about Africa and using Africa as a case study, unique challenges that pertains to the continent and opportunities for climate justice on the continent.
Thank you, Nancy. And really also resonating or aligning myself with the speakers who've already spoken around the issues of misinformation, around the issues of access to information. And what I can say, especially from the African context, is the challenges, some of the key challenges to the climate justice movement. Actually, I had put the top of my list as access to information, stock evidence and data, though this could be three different things, but also the same thing at the same point. So I would say access to information, evidence, and data is still a challenge. Data in the sense of there is need for a lot more research into the solutions around climate change issues. And the data, as Barrack said, does not need to be like, scientific data or something like that, but, how have communities in the past been, say, employing practices like agroecology? How has that worked for them? How are other practices harming them? Having that sort of backup to do the work with, so that, activists are usually accused of making noise without having the facts or the evidence. So this will be a very important way to back up the asks that we are making with evidence, because the evidence does exist. Another challenge, which I think, is the shrinking civic space in some African countries. We've seen some countries suspend social media, maybe during elections or maybe during some other functions. We've had this high concern on digital or online security of activists or climate defenders, human rights defenders in Africa. So that the shrinking civic space, both physically and both digitally, really is a big challenge. And I think the last two I could say is we are coming up against a system that has been there for a long, long time, and that's being backed by very wealthy individuals and nations. So it's an uphill task, and sometimes could lead to activism fatigue, which I can say is like the fourth challenge. When you're working so hard, when you can see the challenges, when you've seen your home swept away because of climate change impacts, when you can see people in your country dying because of hunger and droughts, but still solutions are not coming forth fast enough. And in terms of opportunities, we have a very vibrant youth population in Africa that is at the forefront of fighting for climate change, which is a huge, huge resource for us, I think. We have a vibrance of and plenty of natural resources. We have an opportunity now to sort of rewrite history so that Africa does not keep to be the extractive continent, where people come to get raw materials and we have to import those back. So we have a real chance here to really redefine the path that we take as Africa and how we utilize our natural resources. We have plenty of sunlight, we have wind, we have the critical minerals that will be needed for the transition to renewable energy. And it's a very pivotal moment really for Africa to decide how do we want to utilize this. And finally, we have an opportunity to tell our African stories and use our African experiences to drive change, because our African stories have always for the longest time been told on our behalf and solutions been proposed on our behalf. So it's good to see many Africans now out there speaking from an African perspective and proposing solutions that are Africa-centered. So I can leave it at that point for now. Thank you, Nancy. Back to you.
Thank you so much. Proposing solutions that are African-centered. One thing that I am able to understand is many people want to lift what works in other countries, other continents, and deploy it in Africa. It might not necessarily work the same way. You're supposed to conduct Africa's needs assessment in terms of climate change, in terms of climate justice, and fashion strategies and to fit African nature, and not lifting what is working in another continent that may not necessarily work here, and bringing it here, and you see the challenge. Thank you so much for that. That was really insightful, Emmaqulate. The shrinking civic space connects so well with the activism fatigue. I mean, there is so much you can do, and of course, they're clamping down on the civic space and all, right? So let's move on. Let's move on to the conversation. Now, Tricia, I'm coming to you. The issue of carbon emission, right? Now, recently there are digital technologies that affect digital technologies, of course, they affect carbon emissions, and thereafter they impact the environment. So we want to know if there are any opportunities for advocacy, in quotes, within the digital rights community on issues that talk about sustainable use of technology. So how can these technologies be used in a way that they don't impact or negatively affect the environment and results to further degradation of our environment in general? Tricia.
Thank you very much, Nancy. And maybe the critical entry point here would be to acknowledge that as we have the COP28 happen soon, technology is a one topic that cuts across all the conversations that they're going to have on rest, on health, on the environment itself. And so it's very important to understand, what tech companies and the tech industry can do in relations to protecting the environment and pushing for sustainability. And so for me, a lot of that falls on tech industry accountability. And for us as digital rights, the digital rights community, we then need to hold tech companies accountable to their environmental practices, especially in how they deploy their technologies and how, they're adding environmental, eco-friendly, tech to their deployment, also to their development. The other thing is to advocate for transparency in disclosing their carbon footprint, and also equally for their adoption of sustainable energy sources in their data centers, because a lot of data is being mined and being collected, but the carbon footprint is one that is never really told. And when you look at, the statistics around the percentages Africa really emits, it almost imagines that the burden of, this advocacy and this call lies on Africa, a continent that, really emits the lowest levels and the lowest percentages in carbon footprints. And especially because, the conversation where we walked in is really, for us as an African continent, is to play catch up with the global north on where they are, because we are still just industrializing for a lot of the global south. And for them, they've already gone into the industrial revolution. They've dealt with the realities of that. And so while we enter the fourth, or while we actively thrive in the fourth industrial revolution, the critical conversations to have are on eco-friendly tech manufacturing, but also on their disposal practices, including recycling and reducing on electronic waste. So for us, more than anything, is that in integrating sustainability in our advocacy is to call them to be responsible, but also to call them to reduce on their carbon footprints, and if anything, to pay for the carbon footprints that they create. It could be that we tax, these kind of tech companies to implore them to not only reduce, but also choose alternatives that protect the environment. The unfortunate bit of that is a lot of them can afford it. A lot of the people in the Silicon Valley can afford, the taxes, that could be put on their carbon emission and their carbon footprint narratives. But it is on us then as the African and the global South to find entry points on how we then deploy eco-friendly tech within our ecosystem to make sure we protect ourselves, but also to make sure that we protect the environment. So this not only benefits the environment, but also it aligns with the core principles of, digital rights, pushing for ethical tech practices and pushing for, eco-friendly and sustainable tech deployment. It is for the long run, beyond the now, because as we continue to deploy, as we continue to, develop tech, the imagination is that the advancement is happening so fast, and so we are not adding these sustainable narratives to what is being deployed. But for the long run, particularly for the global South, we need to have conversations on what's being brought into the system, even for hardware, because I know there is very little room for disposal of these laptops, of the phones. And so we find ourselves in use and throw, use and dispose of. But if we could find ways of creating, sustainability initiatives and sustainability hardware that we can use for the long run, it makes for a better case when it comes to sustainable tech development and sustainable tech deployment. Yeah, I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Tricia. But I have a question, right? I picked it from one of what you said. I'm reducing carbon footprint, right? Let me give Nigeria as an example. We have now. Let's look at how the impact. How do you encourage citizens' will, right? Individual will. So, for instance, there is a company, a giant oil company in maybe a riverine area, mining oil, and in the course of doing that, they taint the water, taint the environment, which affects citizens. You sleep overnight, you wake up and you swipe your window and you see this carbon black soot, I think, on your hands. It shows that it's everywhere in the environment, right? And you made mention of the fact that they can afford it when we said about holding them to account and that they should pay for some of the irresponsible disposal practices that they do, right? Now, those big conglomerates bring the money because, in quotes, they can afford it and throw it at the faces of citizens, at the faces of individuals who then kind of like turn the other side, pick the money, because they tell you that, oh, they've ruined my environment and let me just take the money. So how do we work our way around building citizens' will in, fighting for the long run and not just to take care of the immediate, or maybe in quotes, put food on the table and take the money and pocket it, but else you suffer at the long run. So what do you have to say about that?
Thank you very much, Nancy. I do not want to also negate the fact that in as much as we are holding the tech industry to account, we also equally need to know as users, we are part of the people that create, the carbon footprint. I'll give some statistics. When you look at the social media and those that are working for climate change, TikTok emits as much as 2.63 grams of carbon dioxide. That is per minute of each active user. When you look at Reddit generates slightly 2.48 grams of carbon dioxide per minute. Pinterest, emits 1.30 grams per minute. Instagram 1.05 per minute of carbon dioxide per minute, Snapchat 0.87. And so a lot of the realities, when you think about, Twitter, that is 0.6, where the majority of youth and also Nigerians are, but also actively, using these platforms. So the imagination for a lot of people is that the individuals, us as citizens, do not have a contribution to the environmental realities of carbon emission, but hardware is one of the ways. Through the computers that we use, we do, contribute to the digital carbon footprints through the use of equipment like, charging our phones, our laptops, the routers, the modems, through data transfer on our LG and 5G network transmitters, as well as the cable internet, through the data storage and data centers, the server rooms, all that, in their consumption of huge amounts of electricity, use energy, but also contribute to the carbon emission, and in any case, the digital carbon footprint. And so for us as citizens, having this awareness becomes important for us to appreciate the realities of climate change and, the carbon emissions and what we can do about it. So raising awareness among users about, the environmental impact of their digital consumption is very important. And so we need to provide information on what they can do in choosing energy efficient devices, in reducing e-waste, in adopting eco-friendly practices, but also in encouraging the digital rights community to collaborate with environmental organizations to promote this sustainable tech use, and also advocate for policies that incentivize green tech choices. For example, deployment of solar powered data centers. So us as individuals or as citizens also have a call to action attached to our digital use, in the way we use these digital platforms, but also in having the realization that it is not, this ecosystem works together, that you cannot have sustainable tech without ethical and eco-friendly use. So we cannot leave the responsibility to one entity, but work together as citizens in raising awareness on those narratives, choose eco-friendly tech, but also know what we are contributing to the carbon emissions and to the
Tricia, we can't hear you anymore. You're stuck on your screen. I think it's your network. Okay, so yes, can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. You were wrapping up your point.
Yeah, and so for me, I believe that that awareness and that collaboration between the citizens, the climate activists and the digital rights advocates in creating an understandable reality around tech becomes easy for us to know what our contribution is to carbon emissions, but also how we can choose eco-friendly options in deploying, in using tech, but equally in understanding the correlation between tech and environmental issues, because that stays a gray area. A lot of people do not know their contribution to carbon emissions. A lot of people don't appreciate their contribution to climate, disasters and climate, and the need for climate justice when it comes to narratives around tech and carbon emissions. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tricia. That was thoughtful. So we're winding down on the conversation, right? And I have a question for all my speakers, all our panelists. I want them to just throw in 1 or 2 cents, right? Let's talk about what other ways can collaboration between climate justice activists now and digital rights advocates strengthen efforts to address both movements' objective, ways of collaboration between the climate justice activists and the digital rights advocates to strengthen efforts to address both movement organizations. So let's start off with Barrack. Barrack, let's hear your thoughts on this, and then I'll go on to Emmaqulate.
Just kindly repeat the last bit of the question. I missed it.
Okay. All right. So we're asking for ways in which collaboration between the climate justice activists and digital rights advocates can be strengthened. Not just strengthened now, but strengthened enough to address the objective of the individual movement.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think first and foremost, we need to do a mapping, obviously, of actors. We are talking about the African region, so it will be useful to do a mapping of the actors and the specific issues that the actors are actually focusing on across the African continent and where they are located. I think we first of all need to establish where there are gaps with respect to this. Secondly, we also need to have a mapping of the issues, which I have mentioned. I think first I said actors. Second, we need what are the issues? I think there's a lot of resources that are already being dedicated into this conversation, and we need to know the issues that they are being dedicated towards so that we don't duplicate our efforts. Thirdly, I think once we have done a mapping of actors, I would then propose that where possible, we have memorandum of understanding between organizations that have synergies. You may find that some are simply advocacy organizations, whereas others are technical organizations or implementing organizations. I know that funding is a major concern to CSO organizations, but I think when the issues at hand are clarified and there's clear collaboration or synergy between the private sector and CSO actors, even local private sector actors within the African continent can be able to contribute resources to address local needs for the kind of conversation that we are having. And finally, we need more conversations similar to what we've had today. I think this was unique, but also very informative and very educative. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. You've mentioned stakeholders mapping and knowing what the issues are to avoid duplications, and of course, MOUs between organizations with synergy and more enlightening and insightful platforms such as this one. Thank you for that. Emmaqulate, what are ways that we can collaborate, to strengthen efforts to address the movement's objectives?
Thank you, Nancy. I think really just an addition to what Barrack has said, because he's pretty much covered everything, the need to understand who is in the space, what are they doing, where are the gaps. And the need for, more conversations like this. So raising awareness on these issues, the collaboration between the two spaces to really understand. I also did find it quite interesting, I was like, digital rights and climate change, but now being here and having this conversation, I can already see where the connections are, and definitely so more conversations on this. And I will say there might be need for a little bit more work around the two movements supporting each other on aspects of access to information, and also in terms of the I want to call it freedom of expression in connection to the shrinking civic space. So really access the right not to have internet shut down, or the right to feel that safety and security online as climate activists or as human rights defenders. So how can the two movements really work to protect these people digitally, to protect them online, and also to ensure that there is access to truthful information also? Yeah, I can leave it at that point.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Lauritta, your thoughts, and then we'll have Tricia.
All right. Thank you so much, Nancy, for moderating the section. It was such an insightful section with all the panelists. Thank you so much. I would like to add, because a lot has been said already, that this conversation should be ongoing. It shouldn't stop here. Even myself, at first, when I saw the topic, I was like, how do we create this nexus? But then I'm really understanding the need for this conversation to go ahead. And as young people, we should understand that we are at the center of this crisis, the climate change crisis, and we must do all we can, collaboration, partnership, to see that we move this cause forward. We promote actions, and we were able to, in Nigeria, we were able to form a Media and Climate Action Coalition, which was launched last 2 months, and with the main focus of creating an awareness for climate activists. How do you tell climate story? And for the media, how do you also tell climate stories? So we resulted to saying that, okay, the media would train the climate change advocates and activists, and the activists will also train the media. So I don't know how I'll call that kind of learning, but then it's like a learning period for the both of us to understand that there's a best way to do these things. So like I said, this conversation should be ongoing. We shouldn't stop here. A lot of people are on this call right now. This is a message to take back home, create awareness, educate people on the need for digital data and also digital information and the use of digital tools to create this information. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe what you were looking for was cross-sectional learning. Thank you for that. The need for partnership to promote actions and ongoing conversation. Tricia, let's have you, and then we'll take questions. I believe we have questions already on the chat box. We'll take them after Tricia.
Yeah, so for me, my entry point is in data. Data is at the heart of many of the problems and can also be part of the solution. And so we need to advocate for access to reliable climate and environmental data so that we can remedy misinformation, we can drive policy agendas, but also influence the public understanding and public opinion around climate and digital rights. The other thing is that tech companies need to be held, and they really hold a lot of information, so they need to be held accountable to sharing information about, critical issues like water, energy usage from their data centers, and they need to be able to share it and, ethically use it. And maybe also the other thing is in addressing climate misinformation, we need to collaborate with the tech industry to be able to share information so that we do not, work around hearsay, work around rumors, but have, the numbers and the data to help us push for efficient initiatives in addressing climate justice issues. Then the other thing is, large data models are being developed by the tech sector, and they are a huge driver of emissions, and they're increasingly central to big tech. And so we need to make sure as their efforts grow, we need to push for eco-friendly, tech deployment and development so that we, create that loop and intersection between climate, environment, and data. Because the sustainable ecosystem around that then pushes for climate justice, but then also for digital rights. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. That was well said. Good thing is that we're recording this conversation, so of course we're gonna have some take-homes shared with us at the end. All right. Now we'll open the floor to questions. Let's see. We have 2 questions. Yvonne from CC Hub says, "How can citizens be engaged to begin to take personal responsibility of the environment for a more just climate justice and preservation?" I don't know, Emmaqulate, do you want to take that? How can citizens be engaged to begin to take personal responsibility of the environment for a more just climate justice and preservation? Let's have your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, through conversations like this, public awareness raising plays a very important role in, say, behavioral change or in directing, societal action towards one thing or another. And another thing that I've seen currently being done is incorporating environmental conservation into the curriculum in schools, in primary schools, in secondary schools, in universities, which also really helps. So more conversations like this, not necessarily informal, places, having these conversations with our families, with our friends, will really help take this to the next step.
Thank you. Thank you. Do any of our speakers also want to speak to that question before we take the next one? Okay, so Simon says, good point, Tricia, that there is also planned obsolescence which only affects accessibility in Africa, but also contributes to e-waste. Okay, which not only affects accessibility in Africa, but also contributes to e-waste. How can CSOs address this? How can CSOs address this? Barrack, Tricia, do you want to come through on the question?
So yeah, so also planned obsolescence, which not only affects accessibility in Africa, but also contributes to e-waste. And for us, I think as citizens, but also as, civil society, our entry point is in dealing with not only the misinformation, but also dealing with the critical issues of ethical deployment of technology. We need to be able to address, the elephants in the rooms when it comes to, not only just accessibility, but also usability of the things that are given to Africa, including hardware, what digital appliances are coming in with into Africa. Are we receiving products for Africa? That means, quick use, and then you have to get another one. Issues of disposal. Are we really talking about issues of disposal? Are we dealing with a China narrative when it comes to Africa? So for us, beyond accessibility, also usability is important for us as Africa. What can civil society do about it? More than anything, advocate around such issues, such deployments, such developments. Beyond that, we also need to have government's, input, because civil society cannot carry the burden of holding, big tech and technology developers to account alone. But we need, that synergy between environmental activists, digital rights activists, data rights activists, but also government. So government then needs to be able to deploy policies, need to deploy regulation that manages what hardware and what tech comes into the global south. Without political goodwill and government goodwill, it is very hard for us to take on big tech, to take on technology developers on our own. And so for us, we are hoping that these conversations reach the industry and the ministries that need to be at the forefront of making policies and making laws and regulations that protect the users and protect, the end users of these technologies. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. Barrack, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah. If I may add.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Yes, just a quick one. I would say that as civil society organizations, especially those that are within grassroots areas, there is always an opportunity to collaborate with organizations that are working on e-waste. For instance, having designated collection centers within our premises or within the environments that we serve. Because I know in most communities, most people don't know what to do with e-waste. So we have many homes or many schools with the old computers with CRTs. And what do people do? They put them in the bonfire and try to burn them. And there are so many things that are within this equipment that is even harmful to the immediate environments that they are in, lithium ion and all those things. Even when it comes to phones, we don't have clear disposal frameworks, yet every year our countries, people are buying millions of phones, which become obsolete within months. So I think as civil society organizations, it's important that we consider supporting entities that collect e-waste at the very minimum, by having collection centers and working corporately with those who dispose to find proper ways of disposing this e-waste. So that's what I will add.
All right, thank you so much, Barrack. Thank you, Tricia, for sharing your thoughts on that. For winding down really fast, I think we don't have any other question. If you also have a question, you can use the raising hand emoji, so that we could unmute you and you can speak. But in the absence of none, let's just have our speakers concluding 1 minute just to conclude and wrap up, give us recommendations when necessary. And we're going to start with Lauritta, then Tricia, Barrack, and Emmaqulate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Nancy Odimegwu for the wonderful moderation. I would like to just, my last words here should be that climate action is real. Our little action matters. We should understand the importance of taking actions as young people. We should understand that it is based on the local context. Climate change affects us all differently, and we should understand how it affects us and try to create solutions that are sustainable, that will help our communities really adapt or mitigate the impact or cut down carbon, because we have had a lot of conversations on carbon emission and just transition. This should settle down to communities and how communities are really ready. We are young people, and this should be at the heart of our action and our day-to-day activities. So thank you so much for this wonderful webinar. Thank you.
Barrack, can you hear me?
No, I can.
Yes, please. I can hear you now.
Yes.
On my part, I think we need more information. We need more education on the real issues around climate change. We also need the right information. For instance, our governments are receiving a lot of resources from organizations that are championing climate change. If we don't know what these resources are for, we cannot audit or call for the right use of these resources. So they'll just be misused. And I think it is the responsibility of civil society organizations to be able to call out these issues that are not very obvious to the common man. And last but not least, let's simplify our communication. I think this is a very sophisticated conversation that we have had. If I was to have this with a villager, I'm sure I would need maybe 48 hours to be able to explain what I'm talking about. So whether it means getting communication consultants to help us break down this conversation into a narrative that can be digested by the community, then let's go for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much. I think for us, we know that there is an intersection of, data and digital rights with climate justice and climate rights. But then the work is cut out for us to, continue to connect and build on the impacts of the extractive industries and the digital technology. We need to continually, push to have, funding that helps in shifting these narratives, but also provide solutions to addressing the realities of climate change when it comes to the digital ecosystem. We equally need to continue to have creativity and demonstrate, an easier language creation when it comes to communicating the impact and the response that it needs when in issues of climate crisis. So for us, the work is cut out for us. There is a lot of, environmental impacts that are happening as a result of technology, but also as a result of, data mining and all the internet use that we have. So constantly, our work and the urgency that we have is in building sustainable internet infrastructure, sustainable technology, and that will then propel us into climate and environmental justice. And when we find that intersection and work around it and along it, I know we will be able to, deal with the different narratives on online news, internet use, technology development and deployment, and how we can push for sustainability, particularly for the global south. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yes, last but not the least, Emmaqulate.
Thank you, Nancy, and everybody. I think I'll just, in addition to what everyone has said, really let's keep these conversations going. Let this not be the end. Let's forge ways to collaborate in future to see how the two sets of movements can work together to promote change for Africa. And thank you so much for putting this together. This was an amazing conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the knowledge that you shared from your well of knowledge. We appreciate you. Now, the information that we've learned in your key takeaways, access to information, sharing the right information, of course, data, synergy, deploying, being responsible and accountable from the part of the technological companies as well, and the part of citizens as well, ways to influence public understanding, partnership, technological collaborations. There is a host of others. It's been an insightful session so far, and we appreciate you. And to the participants that were able to join in, thank you so much. You can also bring yourself up to speed on AIRA's activity on our Twitter, on our social media platform, on X rather, X on Facebook and our LinkedIn. And you can also visit our website. We have lots of information there. It's AIRA.Africa. And on that note, we say thank you to everyone, speakers and participants, and of course to AIRA for putting this very interesting October edition of AIRA Talks together. Yes, AIRA Africa on Twitter. AIRA as in AIRAFRICA. Yes, on that note, we say thank you so much and do have a lovely day. My name is Nancy. It's been an interesting conversation. Enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your evening, wherever you are. Yes. Have a nice day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Nancy. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you, Barrack. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lauritta.
Thank you, Nancy. Bye.
Bye.